The movie opens with a man and his father bringing flowers to the grave of the most important woman in their lives, his mother. The man's name is Dean. He's an illustrator living in Brooklyn, whose mother has recently passed away, leaving a void in her son's and husband's lives. Dean is a strange-looking man, with a hairstyle that his father begs him to change. His life before his mother's passing was very different. He had published a book with his illustrations that was a success, and he had a pretty fiancée called Michelle. The loss of his mother left Dean feeling adrift, as if he had lost a part of himself. He loved his mother more than anything. Losing her is a blow to his heart. Over the days, Dean slowly loses his passion for life. He breaks up his engagement with Michelle and becomes more introspective. His father, a retired engineer named Robert, is doing the opposite of Dean. Instead of wallowing in his pain, he's doing everything in his power to move on. He works out, watches movies, and sees a therapist. During one of the weekly lunches, his father informs him that he'll sell Dean's childhood home because he can't bear the memories anymore. He feels as if the ghost of his late wife is hovering in the house, hindering his mental health. Dean can't believe his father. He has good memories of the house and doesn't want his father to sell it. Robert knows that Dean's outrage comes from the fear of losing his mother's memories, so he suggests Dean should call his therapist to talk to him. He knows his son isn't doing so well. Dean refuses to go. According to him, he's a self-help kind of guy. And he's fine. He's lying. As soon as he arrives home, he goes back to his unhealthy patterns of drawing morbid pictures or staring at nothing for hours. Little seems capable of bringing him happiness. He has to finish his new illustration book, but he has no inspiration to do it. To make his life worse, his best friend, Brett, is getting married in a few weeks, and Dean is his best man. The issue is that he isn't the only one. Brett also invited his business partner to be his best man, and Dean fears he'll lose his friend to a random guy. Not only that, but he's also jealous of Brett. Despite being an idiot, Brett has a great career, and he's getting married to the woman he loves. His life is on the rails, and he's happy. He's also a good friend and cares about Dean. In his opinion, Dean needs to deal with his grief and his issues with his dad before being in a relationship again. Father and son are lonely, but for some reason, they don't want to be in each other's company. Robert receives his first offer for the house, and he meets Carol, his real estate agent. Carol is a pretty woman in her early 60s. At first, she finds Robert a bit strange, especially because his house is a mess. When she finds out that his wife recently passed away, she understands why it's like that. She feels sorry for him, which makes her determined to help him sell his house. A few days go by, and Brett's wedding day arrives. At the wedding, Dean finds out that he's the second best man, while Kevin, Brett's obnoxious business partner, stands beside him. Dean is not happy with that at all. His mood sours further when he sees Michelle, who is a bridesmaid, and notices that she keeps looking at a handsome man. The day before, Dean made a card to Michelle to ask her back, but now he isn't so sure that she will accept. The wedding is a mess. Dean is jealous of Kevin, and Kevin keeps trying to push Dean away from Brett. Both of them do speeches, trying to be the best ones. During Dean's speech, he boldly announces that he's Brett's best friend, and that his wife met him through Dean and Michelle. Brett feels awkward at how blatantly obvious their competition to win him over is. The guests also notice. When Dean makes a joke about Kevin, he gets offended and tries to attack him. They get into a physical skirmish, much to Brett's embarrassment. Dean feels miserable after the wedding. It's a horrible feeling to know that he's losing everyone around him. He is lonely and sad. The following day, he wakes up at his apartment, still in his suit, with an empty bottle of wine and donuts. Robert calls him to ask when he can come to the house to take his old things back, and Dean comes up with multiple excuses to not go. He once again pleads for his father to reconsider, and Robert agrees, as long as Dean goes there so they can talk. Instead of doing as his father asks, Dean comes up with an excuse as to why he can't go. He'll go to Los Angeles to meet with some creatives, after receiving an invitation from a man named Eric during Brett's wedding. At the time, Dean denied having any interest in working with a team in a company, but he's reconsidered. Dean goes to a marketing company to try and get a job as an illustrator, but the company is too modern for Dean's tastes. To add insult to injury, the way the interviewers passive-aggressively offend him and his illustrations makes him leave before the interview is over. Once again, he's hopeless, not knowing what path to take in life. He calls his Los Angeles friends to go out and have some fun, but none of them agree. As usual, when he's feeling sad and lonely, he listens to one of his mother's voicemails that she sent before she passed. It warms his heart to know someone loved him for who he is, with no expectations or judgment. Alone in his hotel room, Dean expresses his emotions through his illustrations. Later on, one of his friends from Los Angeles calls him back. It's a woman named Becca. She apologizes for not calling him before she was working. Becca is a beautiful wannabe actress who's trying hard to get a successful audition. She's talkative, funny, and a bit of a bubblehead. Dean has nothing in common with her. Spending time with her is better than being alone, though, so he accepts going to a party with her. Becca introduces Dean to her improv friends during the party, but soon leaves him alone. He feels small and isolated, not knowing anyone but Becca. Amidst his attempts to socialize, Dean's gaze is instantly captivated by a striking blonde woman, who catches his attention the moment his eyes fall upon her figure. She wears a red blouse and she has a cute smile on her face. Their eyes meet, and Dean decides to pose to her nonchalantly. Unfortunately for him, he knocks a tray filled with drinks, trips, and falls in front of everyone, including the woman. It's very embarrassing. Dean quickly leaves to wallow in his shame, feeling miserable about his misfortune. To his surprise, the pretty woman follows after him, worried that he hurt himself. He makes some self-deprecating jokes about the situation, and the woman finds him funny. Enchanted by her smile and the way she doesn't look down on him, he introduces himself. Before she can tell him her name, her friend interrupts their conversation, and she leaves. Later on, Dean watches the woman leaving the party and decides to follow her. He finds her alone on the roof, talking on the phone. He waits for her to finish and silently stands behind her like a creep. The girl is startled when she notices him there, but she smiles at him. Her name's Nikki. They joke around a bit before her friend rudely interrupts them again before things go any further. Before she leaves, Dean asks for her email, but she gives him her phone number. Dean leaves with Becca and she takes him to her house. She starts seducing him, even though she has a boyfriend, and Dean is confused about her behavior. Becca takes offense to his lack of reaction to her, and he has to go back walking to his hotel. Back at the hotel, Dean goes back to drawing, and there's a juxtaposition of his father watching TV alone. The next day, Robert goes to his house and meets Carol again. There are some potential buyers for the place, and he's glad. They start talking, and Robert finds out that Carol is single. She's looking for romance in an online dating app. Robert looks at her likes and dislikes, giving her some pointers on what is good or not. Robert has no romantic interest in her, since he's still trying to move on from his wife, but Carol looks interested. Dean goes out to have some coffee with Eric. He talks about Nikki and how amazing she is, but Eric thinks she will never call him. Dean has only one day left in Los Angeles, so Eric takes him to a nightclub. It's definitely not Dean's scene. He's shy, awkward, and a bit of a weirdo. He doesn't know how to approach girls and flirt. Eric gives him some pointers, but it's pointless. Instead of complimenting the women he approaches, he offends them, thinking it will bring them to his level. After trying hard and getting nowhere, they leave the nightclub to have some drinks in the car. Dean apologizes to Eric for ruining his night with his terrible flirting, but Eric brushes him off. He knows Dean isn't in the right mind at the moment. He believes he needs to stop thinking so hard about everything. Dean tends to overthink every little detail in his life and ends up self-sabotaging. It happened with his relationship with Michelle, and even his friendships. Dean wonders if he can make it up to Eric, and Eric suggests they go to Vegas. They get hyped for a minute, then decide that it's too long a ride, and not worth it. The following day, it's time for Dean to return home. He doesn't want to go back, knowing that he will go back to his depressive patterns. When he's already inside the plane, an annoying woman starts talking to him about the differences between Los Angeles and New York. Dean doesn't want to be reminded that he's from New York, but the woman keeps talking. He receives a message from Nikki right before the plane takes off, inviting him to go to the beach with her and some friends. Dean has a minute to decide if he goes back to his monotonous, lonely life in New York, or goes out with Nikki in sunny California. He chooses California. He goes to the beach wearing pants, a coat, and carrying his suitcase. He meets Nikki after walking all over the beach with his suitcase, and she laughs at him. He lies to her that he's staying at his friend's house, and asks for a ride. They go out to eat and have a great time. Nikki is funny and matches Dean's self-deprecating sense of humor. After dinner, she takes him to Eric's place, and before he leaves, they kiss. It's a spur-of-the-moment thing, and Dean has no idea what to say after. Nikki finds his awkwardness endearing. At Eric's place, Dean confesses that he has another date with Nikki, and he's looking forward to it. It's the first time since Michelle that a woman gave him the time of the day, so he's excited. The next day, Dean and Eric go out to ride bicycles like children. It's a great time for Dean, and he feels good, free. Later on, his father calls to see how he's doing, and to talk about the house again. Dean still refuses the idea of selling the house, thinking only about his feelings. He doesn't care that his father has to stay in the house where he built a life with his wife and kid. All Dean cares about is how much he'll miss the place he barely visits. Robert is a patient man, and agrees to wait for Dean to come back. What Dean doesn't know is that Robert has already sold the house. On a date with Carol, he expresses his worries about telling Dean. He knows Dean won't be happy, but he's beyond caring at this point. Dean can be very stubborn and set in his ways, refusing to listen to the people around him. That's how he manages to push everyone away, including his father. A clueless Dean goes out with Nikki to an art show. She surprisingly brings her rude friend, Jill, and it's obvious the woman despises Dean. He sends a message to Eric to ask for advice, and Eric advises him to leave. He tries, but Nikki refuses to let him go. It's a strange date. Whenever Nikki gives Dean any kind of attention, Jill interrupts. Dean tries to act aloof, but his discomfort shows on his face. To make things worse for him, Becca shows up, and she's with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend is a famous actor from a TV show about vampires, and he thinks Dean is Becca's ex. Dean is completely dumbfounded by the guy's insulting manner. He has no clue what Becca told him. The guy demands Dean never talks to Becca again, and he agrees. When Dean mocks him to Nikki, he slaps him hard on the face. Dean tries to fight him, but Nikki saves him from the embarrassment. Dean is incensed and promises Nikki he would have beat the guy up if given the chance. Nikki looks a little doubtful. Dean explains there's nothing between him and Becca, but Nikki stops him. She doesn't think he owes her any explanation, since they are just hanging out while he's in town. Dean tries not to show that he thinks the opposite. When Nikki mentions she's going to San Francisco with Jill for the rest of the week, he lies and says that he and Eric are going too. The following day, they all go together to San Francisco. Jill is not happy. Eric uses his technique of insulting women as a compliment to Jill, but she catches up to it quickly. Before she can eat him alive, Dean saves the day by saying Eric has a medical condition. The beginning of the trip goes by smoothly, and they have fun together, until Eric receives a call from his roommate that his cat was in an accident. He quickly has to leave to go back home, and Dean is left alone with the girls. In the meantime, Robert tries calling him to talk about the house, but he doesn't answer the phone. They arrive in San Francisco late in the evening, and Dean has to stay in a hotel while Nikki and Jill stay at Jill's place. Nikki apologizes that he has to stay away, but he brushes her off. They are almost kissing again when Jill interrupts for the third time. She really despises Dean. Back at the hotel, Dean is alone again. He calls his dad to see what he wanted, but he doesn't pick up the phone. Robert is on another date with Carol, and they seem to connect a lot. Dean has a surprise visit after he calls his dad. Nikki shows up at the hotel saying that she forgot something. She kisses Dean, and they go back to his room. Back to Robert, his date with Carol goes well. There's something that is bothering Robert, though. As he kisses Carol and goes back to her place, he feels as if he's doing something wrong, betraying his late wife's memory. He confides to Carol that ever since his wife passed, he has been lost. He's trying to figure his life out, after years of living in the same routine with the love of his life. He tried doing everything in his power to overcome his grief, instead of going through it. His running away from his feelings is catching up to him. On the other hand, Dean is finally moving on from his own grief. He sleeps with Nikki, and it's great. He finally feels alive again. After they get intimate, Dean confesses to Nikki that he was engaged, but he wasn't ready for that step in his life. He only did it because he wanted his sick mother to see him happy and in love before she passed away. It feels good to confess his feelings to Nikki. She's understanding and kind. He also admits to her that he might be falling in love with her. Nikki is surprised that he said something like that after days of knowing her, and she doesn't say it back to him. She thanks him and kisses him. It's the worst possible reaction, but Dean is fine with it. For him, after so long of being numb, feeling love again is refreshing, even if it's unrequited. The following morning, he wakes up alone. Nikki sends him a message that she's with Jill. He also receives a notification that it's his mother's birthday, and seeing it sends him back in time to her last birthday, when she was still alive. Dean and Michelle were recently engaged and about to tell his parents the good news. He knew his mother would be happy for them, and that was all he wanted. For her to be happy. Back in the present, Dean gets sad again as he remembers his mother, but it isn't as crippling as before. He goes to the hotel's reception and finds out Nikki left him a letter. In the letter, Nikki confesses that she kept something from Dean too. She's married, though separated at the moment. When she met Dean, she was in the middle of a marriage crisis, and thought it would be a good idea to hang out with him. He's funny and dorky. He made her laugh and feel good again. Things got carried away, and she didn't realize until it was too late that she was leading him on. Jill kept interrupting them because she thought what she was doing is wrong. Like Dean, she was running away from her problems. They found comfort in each other's arms, but it is time for that to come to an end. Dean can't believe he was so gullible to believe he and Nikki could have a relationship. He's really mad at being led on. To make things worse, in his moment of anger, he kicks his suitcase and it falls into a lake. Dean goes back to New York feeling hopeless again. All his progress goes down the drain. He isolates himself in his house and doesn't talk to anybody. There's another juxtaposition that shows his father is going through the same after Carol. A few days later, they meet for their weekly lunch. Robert notices right away that Dean is inside his head again. He looks lost and morose. When he points this out to him, Dean gets defensive, saying that he's tired of pretending. He's also mad that Robert sold his mother's house, not seeing how hard it was for Robert to stay there alone. Their meeting is terrible. Later on, Robert packs the furniture by himself. Dean meets Brett again and apologizes for the way he behaved at his wedding. Brett, seeing that Dean is still suffering from his mother's passing, decides to open his heart about grief. He lost his father too, so he knows what it feels like. He understands how hard it is to go on with your life as if nothing ever happened. People around you forget that you lost someone important, and the world moves on without a backward look. It gets better with time, but it's a void that will never fill again. A wound with a very apparent scar. He describes perfectly how Dean feels, and it's good not to feel so lonely anymore. As a last piece of advice, Brett suggests Dean takes it easy with his father. He's feeling just as lonely at the moment. When he goes back home, Dean starts working on his book. He'll illustrate his grief process. All the pictures depict a part of his life, from the moments he felt as if he was drowning, to the one when he met Nikki. The last picture is of him closing the door on his grief, once and for all. He won't allow it to hinder him anymore. The following day, he goes to his father's new house to help him move in. There, he finally talks about his feelings, and why it's been so hard for him. Dean thought about his mother every day. He saw her in the city, smelled her perfume, and heard her voice. Instead of grieving by crying and reminiscing the good memories, even going to therapy as Robert suggested, he held his mother's memory close to his heart. So close that it was embedded into his very being, and then he didn't know how to let go. Robert holds him as he cries and apologizes. Robert confesses that he will never forget his wife, and that he holds her close to him too. It's impossible not to, after a lifetime together. His only desire is that Dean goes through it with him. That he doesn't disappear again, like he did for months. Dean promises he won't. It's time for a new chapter in his life. Instead of having another juxtaposition to show them separate, father and son are in the same frame, sitting side by side. After talking to his dad and Brett, Dean decides to share his experience with Eric, who lost his beloved cat. He hopes that his advice will help him move on, just like Brett's did. Robert goes back to his old house and sees a new family living there. It's a bittersweet feeling to see that the house, like all things in life, has also moved on to another family, to new stories and memories. He also meets with Carol again, and she's happy to see him. In the end, Dean publishes his new book, and it's a success. As a match for his personality, the book is a self-deprecating depiction of his life cycle. Dean doesn't know what comes next, but after months of numbness and uncertainty, he's ready for a new adventure.